So that was this side of the brain. And once I got accepted to vet school, I thought that's my adult hat. That's my new career. My dream of wanting to be a writer, because I dabbled with it in high school and a little bit into college even, stopped totally. I thought, well, this is time to put aside these dreams of writing. And then after a while, unfortunately, I kept reading, which is like throwing gasoline on this side of the brain. And so I kept saying, one of these days I want to write, one of these days I want to write. Eventually I realized, I'm running out of these. One of these days I'm going to do it, but I tried, wrote a bunch of short fiction that's now safely buried in my backyard. Hopefully no one will ever read that stuff. And then tackled my first novel. I went some details on how that transition was rather tumultuous. We could go over that in Q&A, but I don't want to bore you too long. So I'm just going to jump right to talk about the book, if that's okay with you guys. If you want any more details about that transition or publishing or whatever, we can talk about that in Q&A. Devil Colony. It's always a challenge, to talk about a book in front of an audience when you try to sell the book to the audience. Because if you give too much away, they're going to go, well, thank you, I don't need to read that book anymore. But if you don't give them enough, then they go, that's boring, I don't want to buy that book. So there's always how do I talk about this? And I started this a couple books ago on how to frame a discussion about a book, because I'm going to just frame it by answering the one question that's going to come up sometime during the Q&A. And it's the one question all authors absolutely despise. It's the one question that always comes up. You're going to ask it if I don't answer it now anyways. So I'm going to beat you to the punch. Does anyone want to guess what the one question makes all authors cringe, that all authors hate to hear? Yes.
Where do you get your ideas?
That is it. And Scott Sigler, for those that don't know Scott, also a writer here. It's a horrible question, because most of us do not know where we get our ideas from, and if you ask us, then you make us think about it, and we're afraid that if we look too closely at that magical process will evaporate and go away, and we'll lose all our talent. And I don't have that much talent, so that I can't risk any of this going away, so we hate that question. And I thought it was just me hating that question, but any time I've talked to other authors, he knew, that was right off the block. And so initially I thought it was just me. I remember when Subterranean, my first book, was coming out, I attended a signing by an unnamed mystery writer, we shall call her. If you know the alphabet, you can probably guess who she might be. But so I was attending her signing, and that question came up in the Q&A. Unnamed author, where did you get that idea from? And she gave an eloquent answer, inward expression of her self, and I said, wow, that's great. I don't do any of that. And so I get in line, get up to the front of the line, and I'm saying, wow, that was really enjoyed your talk, and your answer about how where you get your ideas from, brilliant. And I'm a new writer, and a book's coming out in about 6 months, and she goes, well, you're a writer? I says, yeah, and your book's coming out? Yeah. She goes, I made it up. I have no idea where I get my ideas from, but you're going to need an answer, so prepare one. So I'm going to try to answer that. As you will find out, it's not a very satisfactory answer, because I don't 100% know where these things come from. A lot of it's fate, a lot of it's just weird combination of things. Because generally I'm always looking for I always got my antenna up, first of all, for ideas, and I'm always looking for a bit of history that maybe ends in a question mark, or a bit of science that makes me go, what if, that we can explore a few steps into the future. And so I watch all sorts of Discovery channels and science channels things. I subscribe to Smithsonian and National Geographic, and whenever I get something that might be a kernel for a story, I cut it out and I just throw it in a box. It's I can limit it to one of those little cardboard lawyer file box things. I will not allow myself to have a second one. I'm only allowed to have one. If it becomes 2, then it will become 3, then it will become 17. So I know I have to limit it to 1. Sometimes I have to stomp on it a little bit to get all the new thing in there. But I like limiting it to the one thing. But because of that, what I have to a lot of times do is clean it out. Because somewhere down the bottom there's probably mice nesting in there, so it's best to clean it every now and again. So I will occasionally dump that over, and I'll sift through it and look for bits and pieces that might make the story. Is there anything old that no longer, either this author's already, Steve Berry's already done that, out. So you look for things that are old or tired, and I get rid of them. But what happens is I dump that over, weird things sometimes will end up next to each other. that bit of science, that bit of history, that bit of some mythological story about this country will end up next to each other. And I will never make those connections myself, but because they just end up on the floor together, I can sometimes, oh, there's a story here. Now I'll follow that along. Sometimes it'll dry up, sometimes then it'll be a new book. So that's a long-winded answer, or a long-winded explanation to, I'm going to explain just a couple things about this book. I'm not going to tell you how they relate, just a couple teasers of that were out of that box that became this book. And then we'll open up for Q&A and get the book signed. So I'm going to talk about a little bit of the science that's in this book and a little bit of the history that's in this book. The science, since we are in Borderlands, is nanotechnology. Sometimes at other bookstores I actually have to explain what that is. I will not do that here. Because most people think nanotech, they still think science fiction. They think it's something in the future they have to worry about when the nanobots take over the world, but right now they're okay. What people don't know is that nanotechnology is still it's a $70 billion industry here in the U.S. You'll find nanoparticles in a lot of the products you commonly use, from toothpaste to sunscreen to cosmetics to running socks. So it's in a lot of, probably on our body right now is a lot of nanoparticles that are produced and manufactured here in the country. But what is sort of disturbing about that industry, without having to look to the future very far, is that UCLA scientists have discovered that like nano titanium oxide, that's in some children's sunscreens, have been shown to actually cause damage at the genetic level of animals. So it might protect you from SPF 50 from the sun, but it might like grow a third eye right here. But you won't get cancer. So. And then also nanocarbon tubules, another lab discovered that it accumulates in the brains of mice, always a nice thought. So sort of a dark part of that technology that's not in the future, it's right now. There's no requirement to label a product. If you have toothpaste that has nanoparticles in it, if you look at the label, know where it's going to say that. They're not required to list that they've incorporated nanotechnology into that product. And also there's no regulation on nanoparticles. No requirement for safety studies on nanoparticles. So they can put all this sort of stuff in there, don't have to label it, and they don't even have to do safety test studies on that. So it's a little disturbing. So it was a thriller right I'm going, yeah, that's great. So okay, I'm not going to say how that ties to the story, just going to have to read it. There's a reason I'm here anyway, so I told you why you would want to buy the book. And personally, I don't care if you read the book, just buy it. The history. The history to me was probably the bigger angle that sort of triggered me into wanting to write this story. Is I've got some friends that are Mormons, and they were having a dinner party. They were having a heated discussion about one aspect of the Book of Mormon, which is specifically that the Native American tribes of North America, according to the Book of Mormon, are descendants of a lost tribe of Israel. Now, on face value, that sounds pretty crazy. Genetics really don't support it, but they were in such a heated argument. One was very orthodox and said, it's in the book, therefore I accept it. This guy's, well, it's in the book, maybe there's a seed of truth behind there. I'm not accepting it as an orthodoxy. So heated, they almost came to like fisticuffs. I thought, well, if they're that excited about this topic, maybe there's something there. So I began doing research and did some research on Native American history, Jewish lore, the founding of America. And I'm just going to use one example of one piece of history that came out of that. There's actually a lost founding father of America. Everybody knows George Washington, everybody knows Thomas Jefferson or Benjamin Franklin, but there's actually a very significant figure in history that's somewhat been buried and hidden. And he was somewhat of a rock star of that era, of the colonial era. He had the ear of most of the founding fathers. He was on basically the version of the talk show circuit. He was doing lectures all over the place. He was a Iroquois chief named Kanasatego, and the Iroquois nation basically was 6 warring Indian tribes that 250 years before the founding of this country formed a union, combined together to form this nation. They were separate, still staying separate, but they had a constitution that united them together for the common good. Now, Chief Kanasatego was well respected. And at a treaty conference, he was giving a speech. He met Benjamin Franklin. He presented Benjamin Franklin with a single arrow. Benjamin Franklin goes, okay, I don't know what the significance of this is. The chief took the arrow back, snapped it in half, dropped the parts on the floor, turned around. The chief grabbed a bundle of 13 arrows, bound together, tried to break it across his knee. They would not break. Gave that to Benjamin Franklin and said, basically, you are 13 squabbling colonies. You will not survive unless you band together as one, like our Indian nations have. And that bundle of 13 arrows then so impressed, and that speech so impressed Benjamin Franklin, he reprinted that speech and distributed it amongst the colonies.